good.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Wow, this is so exciting. And thank you so much, everybody on this side of the pond and your side. It's just so exciting. My name is Julie Brown, and I'm the mom of the Skills System. And I just want to orient you to this project a little bit, why we're here today. I met Dr. Wies Vanden Bosch several years ago. We stand up, just show us who you are, wave or something. Oh my God, right? Okay, so there's Wies. So she's amazing. She's a DBT trainer. I met her at BTech and part of the Linehan Institute. It feels like a million years ago. And so I always thought Wies was super intimidating, like my big sister. And so, you know, she's like larger than life. And like to make it insane, 2 years ago, she jumped the aisle over to help people with intellectual disabilities. So she's not only a DBT person, but she saw the needs of people with intellectual disabilities. And she didn't just talk about it. She went and translated not just the handouts of the Skills System book, but the entire Skills System book for folks in Holland to be able to use the Skills System with people with intellectual disabilities. So kudos to that. It's just amazing. And in this deal, I inherited this wonderful team as well. Her and her team and Dr. Anne Marie, let me get all these names right. So Van Vonderen and her team now, and Linda is another. So Anne-Marie is an individual therapist, DBT individual therapist, and another person is Linda, who is an individual therapist. And then there's Inger and Nikki are skills trainers. So those guys together were part of the team that translated and are doing this ongoing project. So thank you all so much. A couple of logistics. So the first, the camera is working. I was going to announce it wasn't, but it's great that it is. And so wasn't it cool that you got all those handouts? That's the good news. The bad news is yesterday I changed them. More acceptance. So today, this afternoon, I'll send you the updated versions. My team always said, write it in pencil when Julie's around. So no worries, but I think that the clarifications were good and at least they're gonna be on the screen. So just kind of roll with that. So I think we're leaving, the US people, or at least the people are leaving, and you guys at Pluryn are going to stay and listen to Dr. Van Vonderen talk for about a half an hour, and we'll be back your time at 4:05 and our time 10:05. Is that, Anne-Marie, am I cool?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Bye, everybody. All right. All righty. All right, so I think we're correct. Now I'm going to do a little magic, little IT magic here. Successful transitions. Okay, so hi everybody. Thanks for being here. I know it's a little weird and choppy with kind of the timing, but right now they're going to be talking about these slides and we wouldn't be able to read them because they're all in Dutch. And so I'm gonna do my best to present what they're talking about here. So this, the topic, so this is for about 45 psychologists over in Pluryn. And I wanna make sure, I'm hoping that they're not having to listen to me, but they'll figure that out. So, so they're talking about emotion regulation skills for folks with intellectual disabilities using DBT and the skills system. Okay, now I wanna, okay, great. So I changed the, again, because I changed everything, I changed the handout order. So this we're gonna talk about first. So this is like, I think slide 3 in your packet, not slide 2. So if you're confused, I need to orient you to the transition here. So basically the talk is going to be about DBT. I'm going to sort of orienting us to DBT. I know some of you probably have some experience with DBT, so this will be a total review. We don't have a ton of time, so obviously DBT is very comprehensive and we're just going to scratch the surface. And then we're going to talk about sort of working with people to increase access to DBT for people with intellectual disabilities, you know, in some of the structure of the treatment as well as the skill system. And then they're going to chat about their experiences, which we might not hear too much about. And then we will rejoin that group and do an overview of the skills system in relation to the case that we're going to be talking about. So here we go. So Manon is this case that they wrote, that Anne-Marie and her team put together. And I think it's really interesting for us to look at, those of us from the US, whether this resonates with the people that we're dealing with, and maybe people in other countries, whether you're in Australia or Iceland, other places using the skills system. How does this compare to what I call diamond clients that this system is built for? So this person's name is Manon, and she's 29 years old, and she has an intellectual disability. I think it was in the mild range. This is a fictitious case, by the way. So she's diagnosed with 10 different labels. I just love that they call them labels, and we'd say diagnoses. It's clear that Manon has emotion regulation problems. Manon's been hospitalized in 11 different settings, and each time she's sent away before the end of treatment. Manon, it doesn't say it, but Manon's also on a myriad of medications of all different types. Manon has a difficult relationship with the staff where she ends up residing or interfacing with, and in one moment she hates them, the other moment she loves them. Manon thinks if Manon thinks there's injustice, she is tenacious. She fixes to it and won't let go. Whoever wants to hear, she will tell what she thinks. She is intense in contact, raises her voice, she threatens and is agitated. When staff has had enough, they will tell her to stop with it. Manon can also physically assault staff. When Manon feels depressed, she cuts herself with a knife in her arm. When she feels sad, she can also tie ropes around her neck. 1 or 2 times a year, she goes to the rail track. Especially in the month of December, is hard for her when there are more incidents. Okay, so let's look at this for a few minutes. So we're talking about DBT. Oh, I added the slide. So if you're thinking, where is it? You don't have it yet, but I will give it to you later. Okay, so let's look at the bottom here. I just added a few notes. And so from a DBT perspective, what do we think is going on with Manon? Well, let's just look at it. So through that lens, that DBT lens, that Manon has a lack of emotion regulation skills, and it causes her to have emotional vulnerability. And so what is emotional vulnerability? So it's patterns of emotional dysregulation, cognitive dysregulation, behavioral dysregulation, self or identity dysregulation, and then relationship dysregulation. So let's just look at the story or the case for a minute. And we'll just kind of pull out a few things that help us get a sense of the different types of dysregulation that this woman is experiencing. And I just have to say, like, when we're talking about the skills system, this is one person, but honestly, the model is used with all sorts of folks, whether they have intellectual disabilities or severe mental illness or dual diagnosis, non-disabled, disabled, so it's really used. So we're just using this one example to kind of get a sense of how the model is applied. So Manon has an intellectual disability. So it tells us that she probably experiences a fair amount of cognitive dysregulation when she's going about her life. She's had 10 different diagnoses, and so she's got a lot of emotional variability. 11 different settings. Again, there's a lot of dysregulation probably in her behavior, and she's ending treatment. So that's telling us that there's probably a lot of relationship dysregulation too. And it says difficulty with staff. One moment she hates them, one minute she's loving them. So that's saying to me, like, identity dysregulation. She has a really hard time understanding sort of where she begins and where other people begin and how to interact with that, being able to be herself. A more cognitive dysregulation, when we look at that, it says she fixes 2 thoughts, and that she won't let go of things. And so that difficulty switching tracks or shifting attention, she has a hard time doing that. She's raising her voice, she's threatening, so there's behavioral dysregulation. She's assaulting staff, which gets into that relationship and behavioral dysregulation also, cutting herself, putting ropes around her neck, and going to the rail track. Probably not just to watch the trains. So let's think about this, because it's really important. If we're going to try to help Manon, it's important that we understand what's going on. And so And I know that we're all in love with theory, right? At least I am. And the underpinning, the theoretical underpinning of DBT is something called the biosocial theory. Now, it's not just a great chapter in the books, but it's actually really important to how we understand sort of how these patterns started and how they're maintained, like in current settings, and also what needs to be fixed. So this is really important for us to understand. So let's look at the picture on the left side of the screen, which is sort of a depiction of the biosocial theory. And so the basic idea is that you've got this individual that has a dysfunctioning emotion regulation system, that they're biologically vulnerable. So the person has sort of a vulnerability, a lot of vulnerability. Well, they're living in this invalidating context or invalidating environment. So there's sort of a social content or component to what's going on between. And so the tension, what happens is that there's tension between this vulnerable individual and this invalidating environment. And the outcome of that is that there's constant emotional dysregulation. So let's dive into this just a little bit more, okay? And so this is what I added to the slide on the right side. But let's start at the bottom where it says the vulnerable person. So this is our man. It's the person that potentially has an intellectual disability. So we're going to call her our vulnerable person. Well, instead of calling it an invalidating environment, I like to call it a vulnerable environment because, when someone has an intellectually disabled child, it's a challenge, and it adds a lot of, extra duty for the family. And sometimes if they have low socioeconomic status, they have to have, it's harder to work when you've got a higher needs kid, so there's lots of challenges that go on to be able to maintain your family. So I think that the families get vulnerable. It's harder for them to provide the scaffolding that they need to. And so what happens is with the increased needs on the vulnerable person side, that sometimes there are inconsistent responses from the family side. And then what happens in these cases, that sometimes there's that the child begins to really rely on escalated behaviors. And so as the child is their go-to becomes escalated behaviors, that the environment gets more stressed and then intermittently reinforces the escalated behaviors. So that means sometimes the child gets what they need, and other times they get punishment. And so they never kind of know what's going, and this intermittent reinforcement actually increases the frequency and the intensity of the emotional behavior. And so this develops reinforced patterns of escalation for the client. And so, we look at the results of that. So what happens if this pattern starts happening? So the child or the person, the vulnerable person, starts having their default setting or their default behavior go to the behavioral escalation because it's working, enough. Polarization happens between the individual and the environment, that instead of working together and having synthesis and sort of navigating things together and working together, that there's this polarization instead of synthesis. And then also if the person is relying on this escalation, they're not able to develop the skills that they need to be able to navigate an emotion and emotional experiences. And then the last one is that, when this happens from the invalidating environment, the individual begins to self-invalidate their own capacities. And so they kind of they sort of are invalidating their own sort of sense of who they are and their competency. Okay, does that make sense? Hope it makes sense. Okay, so let's look at transactions for Manon, the case that we looked at. And so the transactions with staff, just so we can look at the evidence of this idea of the back and forth that we were just talking about. So the case said 1 minute she hates them, the other minute she loves them. And so you can see some of the polarization that's going on, where we're beginning to look at, is there co-regulation going on or co-dysregulation going on? She raises her voice, she threatens and physically assaults staff. So here we see the polarization. When staff have had enough, they tell her to stop with it. So we can see that that's that kind of, sometimes, not only is Manon probably loving them and then hating them, but I could probably see that the environment is doing something kind of similar. Sometimes they're super happy with Manon, and other times they're ready to, they've just had enough, or, you know, that's when they say, stop with it, you know? And so this back and forth is part of this sort of dysregulation, this relationship dysregulation. Each time she wants, she's sent away before the end of treatment. So she's just not able to get through these experiences. You know, she gets in and there's no middle ground for her. It ends up, and what happens is there's no middle ground for her. And then there's no middle ground for the team either. So everybody's getting polarized. So everyone's kind of burnt out. And not that we want to, but sometimes we're maintaining these patterns of dysregulation and patterns of polarization. Okay, so here's a slide that talks about the red here is Manon's kind of her level of emotion. And so you can see here that she's going along and it goes up high, kind of, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see here it goes up pretty rapidly to a fairly high level. And so she has lots of tension. This lack of skills creates lots of tension for her. And she responds rapidly to a high level. We'll talk about emotional dysregulation when it comes to my slides. So what happens though, is that because of her cognitive regulation problems, is that she's got more emotion and less ability, less capacity to be able to reduce that tension. And so another problem is that because she does that, she sort of stays at this higher level of baseline, and then other smaller stressors impact her and make her go up even higher. So you can see this kind of escalation up higher. And so there's a slow return to baseline and increased vulnerability at these high levels. Now this, when they were talking about this case with Manon, they talk about how she has these destructive behaviors and that she utilizes them to decrease the tension. And they work really quickly. You know, that they become, and because they work quickly, when the cutting happens, she reduces her affect, and because it serves to do that, it becomes a reinforced pattern. So she's got more going on, less strategies to deal with it, and on top of it, she's got all these reinforced patterns that are problematic. So we can see what we're going to have to be doing. We're going to have to be working on the front end to help the person reduce vulnerability. We're going to have to give them some other tactics to be able to handle the emotion as it's at this increased level. And we're going to have it become a reinforced pattern. So we're working against a lot of really powerful factors here. Okay, so DBT and skills. The secret sauce is dialectics. I know you love that word. What Marshall Linehan figured out was that change for a person like Manon is not just a one-step process. She found out that straight behavioral strategies didn't work. She would have done it, but it didn't work because of all that self-invalidation that we were talking about before, where Manon didn't trust herself and she wasn't able to have her identity. And so if we go straight with change, what ends up happening is that it's like quicksand and that she can't move to change. And so what Linehan figured out is that she had to create this treatment as a two-step process. First is acceptance and then change. So acceptance strategies and change strategies. And the experience of acceptance promotes that self-validation that the person has, and then they can step to change. And so, and then the change is like learning and generalizing adaptive, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, self, and relationship regulation skills. Okay. Okay, so the team at Pluryn are doing standard DBT with the folks that they're treating. And this is so exciting because it's not something we have a lot of in the US, and it's something that I'd love to work towards. And let's see. And so there are 4 major components of standard DBT, and this is they have in place. So there's individual coaching, they call it, and I would probably label it as individual therapy, and it's an hour a week. And treatment generally lasts a year in DBT, although there's some new studies of it being shorter. And another component is skills training. And this is a skills group. This particular group, I think they had another group before where they were using the standard DBT books, but they are not doing that now. They're using the skills system instead. And so they're doing, they have, I think, 4 people in their group, and they're doing that once a week with two folks. So 2 of their team members are the individual therapists, Anne-Marie and Linda, and then Nikki and Inger are the skills trainers. And they're using the curriculum in the book, and they're doing multiple cycles of that. So the third component that they have is 24-hour skill, they call it 24-hour consultation. We would call it skills coaching. And this is through phone. And I'm not sure what other mechanisms that they use. So the person goes to skills group, and then they get it reinforced. They get the skills kind of reinforced in their individual therapy. And in the individual therapy, that's where they really target the specific strategies that they need, and they monitor their behavior and their targets during the week, and they really try to get that targeted instruction through the individual therapy. And then the 24-hour skills coaching is there to help with generalization in the environment, and so that we're able to help people when they're at the lower range of escalation versus just the higher range. So the skills coaching, whether it's done through phone skills coaching, or maybe in the US and more like residential settings, it might be done through support staff being there to be 24-hour skills coaches. The fourth component of this is consultation team. This is really important, is that in DBT, it's vital that we're all in an even playing field, and that it's egalitarian relationships between the client and the practitioner. And because of all that relationship dysregulation we were talking about, and behavioral dysregulation, it can get really hard not to get thrown around by that, because the person's kind of living in this emotional tornado. And when we get, as we can see in the case example, usually when you come into relationship with that, you can sort of get absorbed into that and be really thrown around. So the key is for the DBT therapist to remain stabilized and to be able to begin that process of synthesis versus polarization. And so the consultation team is there to help with the stability and the they call it so therapy for the therapist, where it's to help them remain in that position where they're not judgmental, that they're not just leaning towards change, that they're practicing with acceptance and change strategies and not getting thrown around by all the dysregulation. And so this team has that in place. Let me just see how we're doing for time. So DBT strategies also, on top of, you need a lot of different strategies to help you do this, because in the moment, you have to really know your DBT, because you have to use a lot of strategies to remain in this balanced relationship with the basic assumptions, the validation strategies, commitment strategies, dialectical strategies, consultation with a client, also hierarchy of targets. Those kind of things really help. This is a DBT training, and we're not going to go there because that's a much bigger, but if you want to learn more, there is a book chapter on the Skills System website that talks all about this, and it's a free download off the resources page, books and articles, it's an Oxford book chapter talking about improving access to DBT for people with intellectual disabilities. So what do we want to do? So DBT and the skills system. We want to create, for Manon and other folks, we want to create an experience that helps the client increase their competency. We want to this increased competency allows the client to be able to do synthesis, like they can, instead of entering the moment and escaping or needing to do a life-threatening behavior, the person's able to experience the moment and be effective. And the client's able to have, so that they can have an emotion and be present in it and be okay. The way it is for Manon, she experiences an emotion and she doesn't feel that she's okay, and then escapes it. And there's polarization for herself. So she has this self-invalidation, and then the relation, so that's that self-dysregulation, then it sort of translates out to the ripple effect of relationship dysregulation as well. Here is just a copy of the cover of the book, and of the so that's this book, okay, the 2006 version. And so DBT, so one of the problems, DBT is so great, but in the US, we don't have enough practitioners, in my opinion, using it with people with intellectual disabilities that need it. And that's in both the intellectual disability systems and the mental health systems. And in a lot of our environments, there's like a silo between intellectual disabilities and mental health. And what a lot of places are trying to do that silo breaking and kind of get more joint resources. But really, there's a shortage of DBT for people with ID. Part of it is that there's really a lack of resources for practitioners, and they're accessible because it has to be accessible to the clients as well as the practitioners and the practitioners' systems. And so that's kind of one of my goals, or the skill systems goals. It's only one of me, so it's like my goal, I guess, is to fill the gaps, for practitioners and clients in both the intellectual disabilities and mental health world.
Julie, just your 5-minute warning.
Okay. I'm not doing as bad as I do sometimes.
Doing well.
So I'm very on track, Damien. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this is what they do with their team. So they have skills training, a skills system, DBT-Skills System, 1 time a week in a group. They have clients in individual coaching or therapy to translate the skills to their potential personal situation. This is where they monitor their goals, talk about sort of their week, how it went, where they're going to go and get more detail and do a chain analysis around, okay, how did it go? And this is what maybe, what's what happened. And I do a solution analysis, which is how could have it, gone a little better? What skills can you use next time? And then in between, there's 24-hour skills coaching, as I mentioned. And then the 4 folks that are in this project meet once a week and do that consultation team to kind of help each other. They're doing some data collection, 2 studies, or sort of a retrospective DBT program with 3 clients. I think that's when they were using standard DBT. And then data collection with an app, which I want to find out about this app they're using during skills training with the new model. So that'll be interesting to see what they come up with. It's a small sample, but it's always good for us to get data. But the skill system is really so much under construction right now with all the new resources that I think it's important that we get the model really set before we sort of dive into massive RCT studies, which will probably be next year. Because it's important that we have enough tools for people to navigate these environments and offer both clients and their teams enough scaffolding and enough support. And it looks like, is that what it says? I can't read what it says, but it looks like that was it. All right, well, hi everybody. I hope you had a good talk. So we're just gonna spend the rest of our time until about 10 of. And I'm hoping that you've got the little cards where you can write some questions down. And on our side, we're going to put questions in the chat window, and we'll deal with those after 11. So, okay, so we're going to dive into a little more depth, talking about the skills system. And you can see here on this first slide is the skills system text of what it looks like in English. And the Dutch version, it looks a little bit different. I should have given you some art for the front, but it's okay. We'll deal with that when it gets reprinted. Okay, so we learned quite a bit about Manon, the case, and we went through good slides about emotional dysregulation. And I just want to start pulling this together with the skills system to see how these things are sort of addressed in the skills system more specifically for us. So we're going to geek out a little bit, which is so fun. So you can see on this slide that the first skill we see is the feelings rating scale, which is that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the left-hand side of the screen. And we'll go through that in a little bit more detail in a little bit. But basically, when someone is between a 0 and 3, that they're able to be basically self-regulated or sort of, emotionally and cognitively and behaviorally, self and relationship, they're regulated in the 0 to 3 zone. And then up in the 4 zone, that's when there becomes more dysregulation happening and more difficulty thinking clearly, harder time getting strategies, harder time interacting in relationships in a way that maintains sort of themselves and other people, that maintains the two-way street that we talk about. And then at the level 5, that's when the person's hurting self, other, or property. And so the 4 is sort of having urges to do that, but then a 5 is clearly like that they're actually having one of those types of behaviors, like cutting yourself. So when somebody has emotional vulnerability and the lack of emotion regulation skills through a DBT lens, they're experiencing emotional dysregulation, the high sensitivity, the quick escalation, the slower return to baseline, and then the vulnerability to re-escalation. And we saw that in that diagram that we looked at. The piece that I think is important for people with intellectual disabilities and for us as practitioners is really to pay a lot of attention to the cognitive dysregulation piece. It's not as sort of prominent in DBT treatment as it is in skills system treatment in DBT. We have to make sure we're doing things when the person is cognitively regulated and then adjusting our strategies for when they're cognitively dysregulated. Gets a lot of press is the behavioral dysregulation. And so that we know that sort of when someone gets up into that sort of 4-5 zone, that their behavior becomes dysregulated. And at the bottom, you can see here as a result, that when you're really not able to be in that middle zone, you're going 0 to 5 in 2.3 seconds, like a Ferrari or something, that what happens is when you can't be in that middle zone, it's really hard for you to develop sort of an identity and self. And so you become sort of over-reliant on the environment. And also when you're sort of at complete odds with yourself, kind of shutting down, overdoing and underdoing, sort of too much, too little, too much, too little. What happens when that's happening internally is it also happens externally. So there's a lot of relationship dysregulation. Hence, when we look back at Manon and her situation with all of that sort of turmoil she has within herself and within her environment. So if we're going to be fixing this, we're going to be reducing emotion. Our goal as treaters is to reduce emotional vulnerability for our folks and by building emotion regulation skills. And so to do that, we need to understand what emotion regulation is. And so one of my favorite people is a guy named James Gross, Dr. James Gross out at Stanford, who's kind of the granddaddy of emotion regulation. And he reviewed the skills system, which I'm so grateful to him for. But his work kind of dovetails with DBT and as part of the kind of reconstruction of DBT skills for people with intellectual disabilities in the skills system. So what does James Gross say emotion regulation is? So quote, the individual engages in processes to up or down regulate emotions depending on his or her goal. Okay, so that's really important for us. So our clients often have a really hard time. They're kind of up-regulating things that they want to down-regulate, and they're down-regulating things they should be up-regulating. So their regulator is kind of broken a lot of times. And the processes, when we're talking about these processes, these competencies can impact, and the way that they're dealing with their emotion can impact the intensity and the duration of the emotional experience. And so we can see that when they're not regulating, the intensity goes way up and lasts a really long time. And so when we build in skills, we want to be impacting that trajectory of the emotion. We're not trying to get rid of the emotion. We're not trying to say, look, emotion is bad. We want them to be able to be present and effective at the same time, which is something that Manon isn't able to do. She just can't even be in the moment because she's sort of over or underdoes at that point. Okay, so let's talk about, so James Gross has more fun stuff for us, the process model of emotion generation. So he says, look, it's not just one big glob. An emotion has different phases to it. So there's the situation happens, we bring attention to it, And then we go through an appraisal process, the cognitive processing and reappraisal, appraisal, reappraisal, and then we have a response. And so when somebody has emotional processing problems, like the case that we're looking at, their sense of being able to get across all of these different processes is disrupted. And if we look at our population of people with intellectual disabilities and often co-occurring mental health problems, we call them people with dual diagnosis. But part of the issue is that they're dealing with cognitive deficits of all different types, and it's a very heterogeneous population. It's hard to figure out what exact type of processing problems people have. There's higher rates of co-occurring mental health problems and a lack of different ways to evaluate that, and a lack of different treatments for our population also. There are higher rates of trauma. We don't even have great ways to sort of evaluate trauma. And it's more of that small t trauma, big T trauma is very, very prevalent. There's lots of polypharmacy, like when there's not much to do, folks are getting highly medicated, which either sedates them, and then side effects are seen as being part of the problem and creating challenging behavior. So the solutions start creating the problem. Congregate living, so people get more supervision, and that creates more staffing. And again, the research shows that challenging behaviors or behavioral dysregulation is often a result of environmental factors. And so again, the solutions are turning into the problem, kind of, this recursive problem. And then there's higher rates of stigma. So people are getting stigmatized in different relationships. And there are massive, from the research shows that power differentials are a real problem. So with all these things, it's hard for the person to be able to have the capacity to sort of be competent across all of the difficulty getting across the span of these higher, longer emotions. Okay, so the skill system. So how do we do this? We want to increase competency. And so the skill system is an important tool because it provides scaffolding or structure for emotion regulation processes. So we can see here that the strategies involved with bringing attention to a situation are addressed in the skill number 1, clear picture. And so that gives us the clear picture do's to be able to systematically sort of be present in the moment, understand the moment, and go through that, sort of be self-aware in the moment. And then the appraisal process, the structure of that is in on-track thinking. So it breaks down like a task analysis of on-track thinking and the cognitive processes. And then the response is that there's all the other skills highlight different options for responses. And so the 4 modules in DBT were basically what had to happen was that I had to take pieces out of each of the models so that the person with an intellectual disability could bring all the necessary tools into the situation. They don't have the executive functioning capacities to kind of have divergent learning. And so it was important that the system have the structure to be able to help them because they're getting so dysregulated so quickly that they don't have the cognitive capacity. So I need to make it very clear in the moment with that scaffolding. Okay, so with the skill system, this is, you can see the dotted line is our dysregulated experience that, say, Manon would have had. It goes up really high, really fast, and sort of remains high with that slow return to baseline. And so it's not that we're trying to create level 1 and 2 feelings out of high stress situations. It's just that we want the person becoming aware much earlier in the chain. And you can see the difference between the black line, the black dotted line, and the red line. So what we're trying to do is just change that trajectory a little bit. We're just trying to have the person be present and give them some adaptive things to do. And then we're going to, so that's in clear picture. And then in on-track thinking, the same thing. We transition from clear picture into on-track thinking. And so the chains of behavior, remember how we said with Manon that these are highly reinforced patterns. And so what we need to do are create new reinforced patterns and fill in the gaps of all these steps during the span of the emotion. And so they do clear picture, on-track thinking, on-track action. In this case, they do safety plan and then NUMI activities, which is the teacup they play a video game, they're listening to some music. And you can see the crest of the emotion, that duration, and you can see the black line stays up and the crest of the regulated emotion begins to come down a little sooner, a little lower and a little sooner. And then they do clear picture again, and they do on-track thinking again. And so it's a cycle of being able to bring the skills to the moment and be present in the moment and make new skills chain in every situation. And so what we're doing is changing the intensity and the duration. Okay. So one of the beautiful things in DBT is the idea of transactions. And we talked about that in the first part of our talk. This is really important for people with intellectual disabilities because they're living in environments with tons of support. That's part of the being diagnosed with an intellectual disabilities is that you have deficits in daily living capacities. And so sometimes they have a lot of people around, which means we're going to have a lot of opportunities for transactions. And so let's just read what how Marshall Linehan describes transactions as we can dive into this a little bit. So individual functioning environmental conditions are mutually and continuously interactive, reciprocal, and interdependent, continually adapting and bidirectionally influencing each other. So if we think about our support environments, maybe one of those 11 settings where Manon lived and all the different transactions that she was having with the different providers and different service people that she was interacting with. And so the idea of transaction brings all of those folks and all of us into the equation with her. And so that's just a really different perspective. And I think that's what's so wonderful about DBT is it does create that even playing field that we're all accountable in the relationship. So another term I'm really in love with these days is the idea of co-regulation and co-dysregulation. And so let's look at what the definition of co-regulation is. And again, let's think about the role of support providers with people with intellectual disabilities. So what is co-regulation? It's a bidirectional, again, lots of this bidirectional stuff, right? So bidirectional linkage of oscillating emotional channels, subjective experience, expressive behavior, and autonomic physiology between partners, which contributes to the emotional and physiological stability of both partners in a close relationship. So I think it's fair to say that a support relationship is a partnership and it is a close relationship. You know, these staff members are in intimate settings with people. They're in their homes. They're sometimes in their showers. You know, they're helping them with very intimate parts of their lives, intimate parts of their relationships. And so the idea, it's kind of a radical idea that this could be co-regulation, that everybody's influencing each other. It's not just the stable staff and the unstable client. It's that we're all in this together. In the same boat, relationship care, get it? Okay, I know. You've always wondered about that whole boat thing, I know. Okay, so let's think about the skills system and sort of what it brings to the table about creating this co-regulation, and that it creates a common language for people. And it's, in my mind, they're ingredients for positive transactions. Now, what do I mean by a positive transaction? We talked before about transactions that end up ratcheting up and becoming more and more polarized and separated, where people are not on the same page, they're all getting co-dysregulated. So when we're talking about a positive transaction, we're talking about, can people experience, like be on the same page together in a difficult situation and have that synthesis of being able to respect each other, accept each other, and then be together and then move to change together. And that causes growth and development for both sides. This is such a miracle. And so that's it. So if we can get the individual self-regulating with their tools, their skill system tools, and we get our environments self-regulating and being aware, and then working together to be able to manage challenging or just normal situations or just life, that they can work together through synthesis and then both experience development. Love that. Okay. All right, so let's think about it. So we talk about all these transactions and a person like Manon who had 11 placements, right? That's not crazy though, honestly, for people that are 29 years old and they've been experiencing these types of vulnerabilities for their entire life. It's not crazy to think that they've been in 11 different placements. And so in the US, these are, I just wrote down, I don't know, I really don't know what they're called in different areas, especially different areas of the world. So this may just be some of, just kind of descriptions that you're not familiar with, but I think the idea you can get across. So the idea is that, so this list goes from least restrictive down to most restrictive. And I think sometimes these multi-system users are kind of pinballing between all these different programs and all these different levels of support. And so these are all places where the skills system is currently used. And so the little vision is like, okay, if we've got sort of a common language and a common framework for co-regulation, positive transactions in these places, that we might have a little less of this pinballing that we're talking about. So what are these different ones? So independent living, outpatient therapy, school-based treatment, community-based supports, like where people are going into folks' homes, vocational programs, day programs, in-home crisis prevention services where they're going in and helping the home environment, supported living, foster care, intensive outpatient, IOPs, which is like a 3-hour a day for a certain number of weeks. We have residential crisis, Go Reach, 1 and 2 week programs, short-term psychiatric hospitalizations, residential transitions, so transitional homes, which are like 3 to 6 months in the US, trying to get folks, because it's really hard to go from a really high level of supervision right to an apartment program. So they're building some transitional sorts of programming. Apartment programs, community residences like group homes that might be longer term, and then long-term inpatient hospitalization and incarceration. So here's just a picture of how somebody might sort of bounce about in the system, where they'll be going from one to the other. And so, I think that the skills system can facilitate transitions. So if somebody is, say, in an inpatient hospitalization, and they're going to be moving to a community residence, that it's important that they understand. So if they learn the skills system through DBT or not DBT, that they can then, move to and then the residential staff at the new program is aware of what skills are. And so they've learned skills in the inpatient and they move to the residence and they have a better transition, and they're able to generalize their skills and move through the sort of continuity of supports. And it's actually happening in some states, so it's pretty cool. Okay, so let's change gears for a couple minutes, because we've talked a lot about sort of around the skills system, but we haven't really talked about it exactly. And so let's just dive a little bit into the skills system, skills themselves. Now it's important for us to understand that we're dealing with a very heterogeneous population. The skills system is used with, folks that have high functioning autism that may have 130 IQ, 140 IQ, all the way down to somebody that's even in the severe range where they're nonverbal. And while they're not learning specific names and numbers and pictures of skills, but they're being taught elements of it through more implicit type strategies, like they're learning about their safe places or they're learning UMI activities, things like that. And so when we look at the skills list, we have to remember that it's not just a one size fits all. It's got to be tailored to the level and the ability and the setting that people are in. While the language doesn't necessarily change, it's the way that we get access to the language and then access to the concepts. There are times when we have to use the principles and be more conceptual. So there are basically 9 core skills in the skills system. I should have shown you the skills plan map that has like everything on it. I can send that out to everybody later. But there are 9 core skills. There's clear picture, on-track thinking, on-track action, safety plan, NUMI activities, problem solving, expressing myself, getting it right, and relationship care. Now you can see this handout is from the book. And so you can see that it's in black and white, as well as kind of line drawings instead of actual pictures. And so this is part when you purchase the book, whether it's in Dutch or in English or Korean, or it's translated into Korean, Swedish, Icelandic. We're working on Spanish right now, which is very exciting. And you can download the handouts, 150 pages of them, and then reprint them for your caseload and put them in a 3-ring binder. So that's very cool. And so, let's see. So the skills are great, but the problem is skills alone, just having skills doesn't really help us create those skills chains that we want to be able to use in specific situations with the type of flexibility and competency to be able to create new default settings for these clients that have all these reinforced chains that are really powerful. So these 3 system tools help them do that. So we've already learned one, which is the feelings rating scale, that they're going to start rating their feelings using the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then there's something called the categories of skills. There are all the time skills and only skills. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the recipe for skills. And that tells us how many skills to use in the situation. Alrighty then. So here we have the feelings rating scale. So this happens during clear picture, which is a skill 1. We'll talk about the clear picture do's in another minute. But we've already talked about it, that 0 to 3, this sort of starts out as not experiencing a particular emotion, up to a tiny feeling, small feeling, medium feeling. And during this feelings range, the person can talk and listen and give and take and be able to have 2-way street relationships with other people. And so if I could have called this rating scale an emotional, cognitive, behavioral, self, and relationship regulation scale, I would have, but it would not have had that easy learning feel to it. So since that's too long, we just call it the feelings rating scale, but it includes more than just the emotion. It's the person's functioning capacity in the moment. Okay, so that's where it's different than the typical SUDS. And so at a 4, the person's having a harder time talking and listening, and at a 5, they're hurting self, other, and property, as we talked about before. I just want to give you a sense of, so we'll at the end, we'll discuss some of the resources, but in addition to the book now, we've got something called the Skills System e-learning. Course 1 is Skills Basics, and I'll show that to you later. And these here are the visuals. It's in color, as well as it uses actual pictures of people. So you can see that the feel between the book handouts and the e-learning handouts are different, but they're kind of nice to use together. But the color just adds a cool factor, as well as the actual pictures. And those that are folks that work with people with autism, it's been noted that that they do better having actual sort of pictures of people versus the clip art. It offers like more actual cues and helps around that theory of mind issue that they're dealing with. So a full set of these posters, I call them posters, but really you can make them big posters on the wall. And I'm sure we could translate them, by the way, into Dutch. Since we did the whole book, we could easily do these. Or you could put them like to 8.5 by 11 and laminate them for like shoulder to shoulder chats or skills coaching. And then you could probably make little cards out of it for, if somebody needs a personal reminder of what's going on. Okay, so our first system tool is the feelings rating, but then the categories are next. And so the skills list is actually broken down into 2 categories. The first 5 skills, clear picture, on-track thinking, on-track action, safety plan, and NUMI activities, are called all the time skills. We can use them all the time, 0 all the way up to a level 5. And so these are available to us at every level. And then the second category is called only skills. Now these, problem solving, expressing myself, getting it right, and relationship care are only used during 0 to 3. Now, as we mentioned, when we're 0 to 3, we're able to talk and listen, give and take, and we're doing okay with managing the cognitive dysregulation, the cognitive load of a situation. Now, these skills are more interactive, they're more complicated, they have more steps, and so it's really important that a person is cognitively regulated when they're doing them. Now, I have to say, in all my years of DBT, that when people did have an off-track behavior or a life-threatening behavior, or even just made decisions they weren't happy with, often when we went through the chain, that we would go through it and see that what happened was when they bumped up to a level 4, they started using, they used their calm-only skills. They tried to solve the problem, or they tried to express themselves at that time. And so what does problem solving look like at a level 4? So if you hate where you live and you decide to do some problem solving, you might run out of the house. If you're at a level 4 and you really hate the house manager and you decide to express yourself about it, you might start yelling and screaming and using foul language. Getting it right. If you really need something from someone and you're at a level 4, you might start getting super demanding. So what we want to help the client understand, it's not that we shouldn't do problem solving at that time at all. It's just that's not the right time to do it because we're not cognitively regulated. And so what we'll want to do is help the person sort of bump into and use their all the time skills at that time. So they need to have a clear picture to see their feelings rating and make a decision to use their all the time skills versus their calm only skills at that time. And we want to make sure that they use their calm only skills later when they're more regulated. Okay, oh, here's the pretty picture of it. That's the handout. Okay, so then the third one is the recipe for skills. And so the recipes, this helps us. So basically the higher our level of emotion, the more skills we need to use. Okay, so remember what we want to do is that the clients that we're helping is that their emotions go really high and they last for a really long time. So we need to make sure that they're using the right skills, not the ones from the wrong category, that they're using the skills from the correct category, as well as that they're using enough of the skills to get across the entire span. And as we mentioned, there's a slow return to baseline, so the spans of these emotions can be longer. So we have to make sure that they have enough going on with their skills and not just say, listening to music. That's okay. So if someone's at a level 4 emotion, we know quite a bit, right? We know that, all right, you need to be what category? It would be the all the time skills, not the calm only. So that means we can use clear picture, on track thinking, on track action, safety plan, and NUMI activity. And at a level 4, we know, and they know, that they need to use at least 5 of those, okay? And so just listening to music is only one NUMI activity, and so that's not enough. We're gonna have to do more. And so when we're skills coaching and when we're planning, we wanna make sure that these coaching sessions for the client and that they have enough skills to get across the time. Okay, so here's the pretty picture of our recipe for skills. And we can see here at the 0 to 3 that they can use their all the time skills and calm only skills. We want folks using tons of skills at the 0 to 3. So it's not, the recipe is just a minimum. We want them doing all their calm only skills at that time. We want them solving their problems. We want them expressing. This is where that identity comes in, where they can start being self-advocates and self-determined, where they can make more and more complicated chains. And they have to, because they're dealing with these systems that are really big and complicated, and sometimes they're not in the driver's seat. So this is about helping folks be in the driver's seat, not in the trunk, and giving them lots of opportunities when they're 0 to 3. And I have to say, in the service provider world, there aren't many tools for the 0 to 3 zone. A lot of what people are focusing on is sort of the de-escalation and the emergency service, like emergency supports. So people are really concerned about when people are dysregulated. But honestly, the skill system is really a tool for the 0 to 3, which is where the gaps are in the system. And it's not really a place where that people are actively, because people are sort of have less verbal processing capacity at that time. So as far as skills coaching goes, our main skills coaching is happening at the 0 to 3 zone and not the 4 to 5. And that's where you're doing the other emergency procedures like safety care, CPI, therapeutic options, all the different MATs, all the different programs for managing that. That's really where that kicks in. Okay, so let's go through the skills. Just kind of, we have about 10 minutes. And we just look at each one of these. Yeah, we actually have about 5 minutes before we do something else. So the first one is clear picture. And clear picture helps the person get really a 360-degree view of the moment. And they do that by noticing the breath, checking their surroundings, doing a body check, label and rating their emotion, their feelings. And this is where that feelings rating comes in. This is where that feelings rating scale is used. And then noticing thoughts and noticing our urges. And so it's important in a DBT model and in the skill system that this is the place where we do an acceptance strategy. Clear picture is accepting the moment, seeing the moment as it is in HD. It's nice and clear. This is not changing. And so this adds an element of accepting and clarity to it. So it's kind of that first step when we talk about bringing our full attention to the moment as it is. And a lot of times this is really hard, right? Because if you don't have skills and every time you see the moment, you either overdo or underdo or get, kind of have a zoom, you head into the tornado. So this is not uncomplicated to do with some folks. And so it takes a lot of good teaching and a lot of good practice to do this. Here's the clear picture poster for it, same skill, different type. And this, I put these together just to show the flexibility in how we teach. Maybe somebody that has autism can't handle all the stimulation that's on this page. And so what we do is we cut it up into 6. And maybe we create like a cards, that we have one card. And that we, so we try different things and we have to use the person's sort of understand their learning profile and adjust what we have for visuals and create new visuals and make it fun. I mean, that's the key thing with the skill system. It's got to taste like candy. You've got to know it really well. You've got to know it well enough to make it fun. And that will make people more motivated. Second skill is on-track thinking. This is the appraisal, reappraisal process. So it comes together. You can see here where the last one is notice my urges. And then it transitions right into, so we want this linkage to happen. We want them, instead of zooming up to a 5 in their, dysregulated tornado, we want them to zoom into skill 2. And skill 2 is a check the urge. And so that link between clear picture, notice my urge, we want to check it. Is that urge going to help me get to my goal or not help me get to my goal? And so that idea of, and that's where the identity and value clarification is so important. That's where we want people understanding what their goals are and getting connected to themselves so that they can start checking their urges to their goals. And then if it is a thumbs down, to turn it, to do cheerleading. And that's where we're creating the skills plan. This is kind of the on-track thinking is the cognitive part of the skills system. And the skills plan is like, what category do I use? Can I use my COM only skills or not is kind of the main question. And how many skills do I need to use? And so it's that cope ahead, basically. It's giving structure to cope ahead. The third skill is on-track action. And so what James Gross loved about the skill system is the sort of triangle, the base. What's cool about it is it creates a base of skills with clear pictures where we get self-aware. Our thinking is on-track thinking. And then behavioral activation, actually doing something, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk of going to skills is where on-track action comes in. And so those 3 pieces are really the foundation. 1, 2, 3 is really the foundation of every skills chain, ideally, because we need to be clear, we need to be thinking, we need to make sure that all our actions are on-track actions, right? That we're kind of moving in the direction of sort of who we want to be or what we want. And it's not always just like, I want to raise. It's more like, I just want to be a good person, or I want to be happy. Like, so there's a lot of flexibility in whatever your relationship is to what you sort of are looking to do. It's not just a prescription. So there's different parts of on-track actions. You can see here, step into your goals, switching tracks, on-track action plan, accept the situation, and turn the page. And so we'll just quickly kind of go through these as we finish up. Safety plan talks about the levels of risk, the types of safety plans, where you should go to be safe. Am I in a safety pickle? Now, I know pickle makes no sense in Dutch, probably. You have no idea what that means. But in the US, it means like that you're in kind of a hot mess, that you want to move away and you can't because of whatever the situation. Maybe you're stuck in a certain place. So are you in a safety pickle? So we have a lot of folks that are over assessing risk and under assessing risk. And so what we want to try to do is get people lined up to create balanced safety plans. NUMI activities is skill 5. We don't want it just to be doing like, I'm going to go listen to music. What we want to do is get more granular. We want to get more specific around function. we want to help people, like say they're confused, we want to help them move towards doing different focus NUMI activities. Now, it's also important that that people understand the difference between a solo NUMI activity and a partnership NUMI activity. And so there's focus, there's feel good, distraction, and fun. And I know I'm getting close to the end here. So these are our commonly skills: problem solving, expressing myself, getting it right, and relationship care. And these are all in the book. They're all in the e-learning. And I just want to go through the resources before we finish up. So basically, how do you, if you wanted to learn more about the skills system, how would you do it? Well, probably one of the better resources is the skills system book. And we've seen both this one and the one in Dutch. And like I said, it's got the downloadable handouts, which is very cool. And you can put those in a binder. Also is the e-learning. The e-learning is available through the skills system website or through me. The best way, if you have an agency or you're interested, I would just email me at jbrown@skillsystem.com. But there's samples of this and lots of information on the website about the e-learning under the e-learning tab. Right now, there's one course available called the Skills Basics, and that's about a 3-hour class. It has 11 lessons and exercises and little badges that you can earn. And you earn your badges for getting 85% of the exercises correct. And that takes about 3 hours. And then I'm adding to the same, and that whole thing costs like $20 per person per year, US dollars. And so I'm adding a second course. We're almost done with it. It's very exciting. And it's going to be skills coaching strategies. And that's another 3-hour course with 7 different lessons and videos. Some of the videos are a little bit longer because there are role plays in them. And so, and again, that's about 3 hours. And so for the $20, you get the 2 courses, right? What a bargain. That's what I'm saying. So the point of this whole thing is because of, the transactions that we're talking about, this is not just for the clinical staff or 1 or 2 supervisors. I'm charging $20 so that everybody can do it. I really see this at onboarding so that everybody has the language and that everybody can be a coach and everybody can self-regulate so everybody can co-regulate. And so if it costs more than $20, I think agencies are going to say, we can't afford it. And what I want them to say is, I can't afford not to do this. And we can't afford not to. And so I may go broke, but it's okay. It's all for a good cause. All right. So, and then so here are some optional resources. Some places have me come do a 2-day training or a 3-day, 1-day, whatever. It's pretty expensive to do. I mean, there are certain situations where it does make sense. Maybe it's an area where, we want to bring a lot of people into a region, or we want to get more mental health folks or more disabilities, disabilities folks. So it does make a lot of sense. Also another tool, and this is a very unflattering picture of me on there, but it's okay. I could have really gotten a better one. I was having a bad hair day, but anyway, so the idea here is that to do remote consultation. It's kind of what we're doing, where I meet for an hour, we just schedule it as needed, and I just, there's a fee. I think it's like $250 an hour to do that, but it's pretty cheap compared to doing the on-site training. And so doing like a series of those consultations, like if you do the e-learning and then do a little bit of consultation, it's a way to provide some structure. Oh, let me also mention that on the Skills System website, on the you see the implementation, on the implementation page, there's something called the Skills System Implementation Guide. I think I'm actually gonna, wonder if I could share this. Oh gosh, what did I do? Okay, all right, I did it. Okay, I just wanna show you this one thing because this is actually worth, and then we gotta go into quite Q&A. Okay, so here's the Skills System website. Okay, you can see here, there's lots of information. So if you wanna check this out, there's lots of information about the skills system here, the samples, like the sample of the e-learning. You can go to the videos, like you can see a lot of different things on the skills system website. So if you have any interest, I'd go there. But one of the key stops is on the implementation tab. and this implementation guide. So if you or your agency is interested in learning more about how you would implement this in your system, because it plays well with other models, you know, like DBT or CBT or motivational interviewing, positive behavioral supports, ABA. It works well with other models, and because there's a lot of models involved with these folks that we're helping. So this implementation guide goes through the process of thinking through of how to implement the skills system, and it gives you a lot of different sort of processes to think through as a leadership group. And then the implementation worksheet gives you very specific questions to answer in that process. And so if you do that and do an hour or two of consultation and do the e-learning, you can really get a strong start at implementing the skills system. Anne-Marie,
Yes.
I think we did it, kid. We're ready for some,
Yeah.
we're ready for some Q&A. So Anne-Marie, I can't hear you at all, so we're gonna have to like move the camera so I can see you. You know how it's always.
Hi.
Hi,
Do you
that-
hear me?
I can hear
Yes.
you now.
Okay, thank you.
I think you have to awkwardly sit in front of the camera and look at us because of the, yep, there you
That's
go.
not good. That's not good.
You look really good though. No, go ahead.
Is er iemand met vragen?
Oh, don't be shy.
Ja.
Gonna make him stand up and come look weirdly into the, come look weirdly into the camera. Come on. There you go. Yes, this is aversive. You'll never volunteer again. Good for
Now,
you.
I had a question. The feeling rating scale.
Yes.
So the person have to feel. They feel it in their body. What the skill is? Is it a part of the program, or is it something?
So we try to break it down as much as, so there's a lot of fluidity, and we don't want to get too semantic or too particular about sort of how it gets divided out. But yes, we try to lead them through starting with the breath, which kind of brings attention to the body. And when we talk about the breath, we try to notice where it is and what it feels like. So that starts bringing, because what James Gross talks about too is that a really important emotion regulation skill is attentional deployment, being able to shift our attention. And so part of the skills system in Clear Picture helps us shift our attention. So we start shifting our attention to our breath, where it's belly or chest. Then we shift it to what does it feel like? Then we shift it to what's going on around us. And then we start the inward process of doing a body check. And so the body check, like what you're saying, is like, do I have butterflies in my belly? You know, are my jaws tight? Are my hands clenched? You know, and from there, it heads into labeling the emotion. Now, a lot of times our folks are terrible at that. They have like one emotion, right? I'm pissed off, right? Or I'm fine. I'm either fine or I'm mad, you know? And so when it starts, you know, so what we kind of do is we kind of find areas of strength in the Clear Picture do's. Like maybe they're great at noticing their thoughts and telling us their thoughts. There's something called Clear Picture Pizza, which I'll share. It'll be on the new thing, but it's like, it breaks the Clear Picture down into 6 pieces of pizza and you cut them up. And so they can just pick them in any order. And it's really important for us to have that freedom, because sometimes it's like our thoughts are really like prominent, and we start with our thoughts. We don't always start with our breath because we live in Tibet and be monks, right? We don't, that's not. So if say our back hurts, we go right into body check, you know, oh, my back hurts. And then from there, we just kind of decide which of the Clear Picture pieces to do. And so, you know, so what we want to do is just build competency in all these areas. We want to help people. We know that people with trauma have a lot of trouble with sort of connecting to their bodies, connecting to their emotions. Feelings language, people with autism. You know, there's a lot of populations where we've got to build these abilities. I'll be honest though, I mean, the label is really important of the emotion, but also the rating. So getting people, whether they know the difference between frustration and feeling disenchanted or angry, that's less important in the skill system than the rating of it. We really want, because the rating tells us what skill we can use and how many skills we need to use. And so I think people over time get better. They start out with one feeling and then they're in group and they're working with their friends in group. and they develop more language. I think the better their skills, the more feelings language they'll get, because the more they'll be able to sort of experience emotion. I have no idea if I answered your question, but you did a really nice job asking.
Yeah.
You did a great job asking it. Now, who else wants to come up and, come on, you guys, opposite to the urge here. Any US questions that you want to type in? Up here you go.
Hi. Yeah, can you see me?
Yes, I can. You look
Yeah.
great.
Oh, thanks. Is there a specific reason why all the skills first are explained, or not explained, but the names and the pictures are learned of all the skills in the system, and then step by step they are?
Yeah. Okay, great question. Now, not always, right? I mean, there's something called a standard approach, and then there's an a la carte approach. Now, standard approach is great. If somebody, because a standard approach teaches, like, first you get a clear picture, then you do your on-track thinking. We do like a standard chain. We use our recipe, we use our categories, that's standard. That's great for the, person with, say, a mild intellectual disability that's verbal, all the way up through a borderline intellectual functioning and above. That's great, right? And it's really important often to have that type of teaching. But folks that are less motivated or less competent, or just, they're butterflies in treatment, a lot of times we do an a la carte approach, which would be we go in with just one skill. Now with a teenager, maybe we start with a teenager helping them learn how to get it right, because what they want is for everybody to give them stuff. Or maybe with somebody that's maybe less verbal, we start with new me activities. Or we help somebody just with safety planning. And so that's part of it, is us being very competent at the skills system, so we know whether we want to use a standard approach or do an a la carte approach. And we just need to be very, in DBT, all of us DBT practitioners talk about jazz. Well, there's another step to the dance of DBT and skills system, which is called the quick step. So it's jazz with the quick step. We're constantly looking at cognitive load and deciding to make adjustments to whatever teaching. And so we have to be very, very aware of the skill, very aware of the person in the moment and what adjustments we need to make. And so course 2 has the quick step in it, and all the skills coaching is kind of, I think that you would like the second course that'll kind of go into that a little bit more. And so while I think it's great to always try to have, because it's not just skills, it's called skills system. And even though we don't go into great depth, like I'm not a big fan of like drilling into clear picture forever. When you do the 12-week curriculum, you move across, like you'll be really mad at me. You guys that are fun group, is that you'll be like, we're not done with what that week had. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you got to move on. You do week 1, which is the skills list. The next week we go on to system tools. The next week we do clear picture. The next one is on track thinking. But then we say, wait a minute, they can't do free recall. I don't care. I want them to keep going. We want to get the broad. It's like a broad exposure to it, because we're trying to create a web, and it'll get deeper over time with the application. So don't worry. You can't get too bogged down on what people are retaining. You'll be shocked. You'll just be shocked a few weeks in where they're applying something or saying something. So don't get demoralized and feel like you can't leave a lesson until someone has free recall. Okay, it's 11 o'clock, you guys. Do you have any other, Emery, do you think we have any other questions?
It's 5 with us.
It's what?
It's 5 o'clock with us.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I bet you guys all like, no, we want to go home. Okay, sorry, it's 5 o'clock for y'all.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Weiss, do you have any questions? You don't want to come sit in front of this and show everybody? Well, thank you all. Okay, well, and you've got, hopefully you have my email, jbrown@skillsystem.com if you have any specific questions. And like I said, I'll be sending out the handouts I changed. So I'll send you those this afternoon or tonight. Okay.
Thank you.